Chapter 70 To keep one's end of a deal. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 3 days had passed since when Daniel had started to produce elemental spheres. He was currently sitting on the ground, and in front of him were the 3 essence spheres he had just finished condensing. The water essence sphere, which resembled a small dot-scaled world completely covered by calm water. The wind essence sphere, which constantly changed in color due to the fast movements of the various gases above its surface. Lastly, the lightning essence sphere, which looked like a ball of white light which constantly discharged electricity in the air. The 3 spheres had been placed in a small triangle, and in between them, Daniel could see the 3 essences mixing and forming a miniature storm. Moving clouds created by wind and water rotated until they finally became small tornadoes. Clouds packed with electricity moved all around, causing the various weak lightning bolts to strike the ground the very moment they formed. Numerous faint thunders constantly resounded in the room as if someone was beating ceaselessly on a drum. Daniel quietly observed the creation of the storm. He was not aware of it, but the sort of comprehension he lacked in order to reach a perfect comprehension of the essences, were in fact, their reaction to other essences. Without him noticing, the still activated time is precious started to once again consume his karma points. At the same time, his comprehension of lightning, water and wind increased. It was only after 10 minutes, and 500 karma points that Daniel noticed that his comprehension of the 3 essences had increases. His comprehension of water essence was now at 90.4%, and his comprehension of wind and lightning essence were now both at 90.6%. The increase wasn't that big, and yet Daniel was enthusiastic about it. He had finally understood what was required to comprehend the last bit of essence. Despite the unbelievable expenditure of 30,000 karma points, Daniel was extremely happy about the result of his work. He wasn't sure about the value any of these spheres might have, but he was convinced that one of his many rich companions would. Without resting for even a moment, Daniel left the comprehension testing room and went towards Rolly's room. After knocking politely on his door, he heard a voice from inside say, "Come in." Daniel opened the door, and found Rolly sitting at his desk. He was studying the content of a book that Daniel had seen in the library. It was a mixed magic art called Mud Blockade, and explained how to mix water essence and earth essence in order to create a swamp, which was extremely effective when fighting martial cultivators. "Hey Rolly, I have something for you," said Daniel, taking Rolly's mind off the book. Rolly slowly closed the book and got up on his feet. He then approached Daniel while asking, "Something for me? What is it?" Daniel raised his hand and opened it with his palm facing up. The next moment, a small watery world which brimmed with lively water essence appeared, suspended just a few centimeters above his palm. "What the? How can you possibly have something like that?" Rolly suddenly burst out in shock. Daniel couldn't help but smile at Rolly's reaction. "I found various essence treasures during the tournament. I've made this sphere out of my own comprehension of water, so it's of no use to me. You can have it," he said calmly, before taking a small pause and continuing, "Give it to Alice after you are done with it. Ask her to commission a treasury room in which high-level essence spheres can be stored." Rolly's face couldn't possibly show a more shocked expression. He looked at Daniel and asked, "Do you plan on making more of these?" "I do," responded Daniel with a casual tone. He was about to leave the room when he recalled something and turned to look back at Rolly. "By the way, can you estimate the rough value of that essence sphere?" "Daniel, this is basically an inheritance. Forget the value of the treasure itself. Comprehension of the essence is the most important thing a spiritual cultivator has. You could buy a small city with this thing," responded Rolly with as much self-control as he could muster. Satisfied with Rolly's response, Daniel turned around and left headed towards the room's door, but before he could open it and leave, Rolly's voice came from behind him. It said, "The middle-aged man came back yesterday morning. He was looking for you." Once again, Daniel turned to look at Rolly, and asked in confusion. "I wasn't gone. Why didn't he come to find me? A weirdly satisfied grin appeared on Rolly's face, as he said that he isn't able to move within the space inside the castle. Oh. He was so pissed about it. From his tone, Daniel could feel the satisfaction Rolly felt towards the middle-aged man's problems, likely caused by the fact that the middle-aged man had suddenly left, leaving him in a nightmare of chaotic space for days. Okay, I'll go see him right away, said Daniel before leaving Rolly's room. Once in the corridor, Daniel sensed the presence of every person within the castle, and quickly found the middle-aged man's exact position. He was currently standing in front of the doors that lead into the spiritual section of the castle's library. The very next moment, he appeared next to him. What reason could there possibly be for locking the space of every room within the castle? Do you only grant tours of bathrooms and bedrooms to your guests by any chance? Said the middle-aged man in a dissatisfied tone. With a faint smile, Daniel responded, I guess I could grant you access. If you let me take a peek at what's inside your pocket dimensions or spatial rings. Very funny, said the middle-aged man while turning to look at him. Once his eyes landed on Daniel's body, he showed a surprised look and said, interesting use of spatial essence. But worthless. What's the point of bending the space around your body? I don't like to be touched, responded Daniel with a matter-of-fact tone. With a slightly derisory tone, the middle-aged man said, I wouldn't have the slightest problem in touching you. Didn't take you for that kind of person, said Daniel sarcastically, while also taking a step back. Daniel was completely safe within his castle, so the purpose of the backward step he had taken was to irritate the middle-aged man. Enough with the sass. You have a problem, responded the middle-aged man, unwilling to continue this battle of wits with a 15-year-old kid. Apparently, one needs to be part of the empire in order to participate in the gathering. How is that my problem? Asked Daniel casually. The eyes of the middle-aged man turned back on the castle's library doors. He waved his hand in the air with a casual motion, and forced the spatial blockade imposed by the formation to rip apart. He then slowly walked inside the library while saying, because a pact has been made, and you have to respect your end. Daniel was surprised by the fact that the middle-aged man was capable of ripping apart a portion of such a powerful formation. He rapidly recreated the blockade around the library and followed the middle-aged man inside. Any idea of how I can solve this problem? Said Daniel while walking 2 steps behind the strolling middle-aged man. The man's finger was lifted to his chin's height, and was pointing at the book's titles. He seemed to be looking for something specific. Without stopping or looking back at Daniel, he said, yes. You can join a group which is officially part of the empire. You'll also need to complete an official task before being considered a citizen of the empire. Do you think you can do it before the gathering? That depends on the assignment. What groups do you suggest? Asked Daniel with curiosity. The middle-aged man finally stopped, and turned to look at him. In his hand, 3 medallions had suddenly appeared. There are many groups in the empire, but only 3 would give you a semblance of status, he said, while picking the medallions one by one from his palm, and describing their origin. The first medallion was of a lucid dark green color, and was made out of high-quality wood and a ring of metal around it. On one of its sides, the outline of 3 different items had been carved in a triangular formation. These 3 items were a crucible, a retort and a conical flask. On the other side of this medallion, a name and a title had been carved. Daniel could not read the name, but he could feel the middle-aged man's spiritual essence within the medallion. The alchemical circuit, said the middle-aged man. Any merchant or group that deals in alchemy is under their control. After the brief introduction, the medallion disappeared from his hand, and he picked another one. The second medallion was bronze in color, and was entirely made of metal. On one side, 2 crossed swords were carved, while on the other side, was a single drop of blood. There was no name written on this medallion, and yet, once again Daniel felt the middle-aged man's distinctive presence inside it, under the form of a wisp of key left in the medallion. The Legion of Blood and Steel, which controls every type of mercenary group within the Empire. It used to only welcome martial cultivators, but after spiritual cultivators had started to be accepted into the various mercenary groups, the Legion abandoned its old uses and welcomed powerful and talented mages as well. Described calmly the middle-aged man. Once he finished talking about the Legion of Blood and Steel, the second medallion disappeared, leaving only one on the man's hand. "This is the group I suggest you to join," he said while showing the third and last medallion. The third medallion had a circular shape, and was completely made out of polished obsidian. On one of its flat surface, 10 differently colored pearls were encrusted in a circle. Daniel immediately recognized each of these small pearls as essence spheres of the lowest level. Their worth was trifling, and their only use was to showcase various different essences. In the middle of this circle was another, slightly bigger bead. Contained within this bead was the spiritual essence of the middle-aged man. It didn't take long for Daniel to discover that these low-level essence spheres were not only used to showcase the various different types of essences. In fact, their main use was to work as components of a small formation which binded the spiritual essence of the owner within the bead in the middle of the medallion. This medallion worked exactly like a key flag, but thanks to the formation, erasing the spiritual essence was impossible, unless the owner died. Only in case of the owner's death, would the formation break and the group be alerted. With a doubtful voice, Daniel asked, "It seems like they keep constant control your every movements. Why would I want that?" "Because amongst these three groups, the magical covenant is the one in which I have the highest position. I might be able to assign a mission to you myself," explained the middle-aged man calmly. "I'll pass. I value my privacy. I know nothing of alchemy, and I have no intention of learning for the time being. My talents lie within battle magic. I'll go for the Legion of Blood and Steel and join along with the rest of my group," responded Daniel while sharing his thoughts. "Very well. I'll take you all back to Dresden. Every city has a registration office, but only in Dresden and 3 other cities within the Empire will you have a chance to be valued by someone worth something within the Legion," said the middle-aged man with a matter-of-fact tone. He then continued, "Come with me, I'll teach you how to put your castle inside a pocket dimension." Chapter 71 Twice as cunning. You are listening at novelfull.audio. "Is that it?" said Daniel with a doubtful tone. "I only need to encompass it with my spiritual essence and shift it into the pocket dimension. That's how easy that is. Of course, if you can't do that you can always try to scale down the space around the castle. Shifting it into the pocket dimension should be easier once you make it smaller," explained the middle-aged man calmly. Daniel's interest had been piqued. He looked at the castle and asked, "How do I do that?" "You find the fulcrum of the castle, and apply pressure towards it from every angle of every direction. It's very complex. Think of it like squeezing a ball into your hand. You have to apply the same amount of pressure from every angle, or the pressure will be released from the points with the lowest amount of pressure is being applied." He then paused for a second before finishing to explain, "Once the pressure will be released, space will shatter and you'll find yourself with 1,000,000,000,000 pieces of a castle to pick up." "It seems impossible to do," said Daniel with an irritated tone. A faint smirk appeared on the face of the middle-aged man, as he said, "It is for you. I am barely able to do it myself. The first method is simple, but requires a lot of spiritual essence. The second method takes a lot less spiritual essence, but requires a near-perfect control over space, and a deep comprehension of it. Why are you explaining this to me, if you know I won't be able to do it?" asked Daniel. "I seriously doubt that you will have reached the necessary comprehension of spatial essence by the time the gathering will take place. So you better remember this. Now shut up for a minute, I have hundreds of pocket dimensions to go through to decide which is the best one to store your castle into," responded the middle-aged man in a dismissive tone. Slightly irritated by the man's tone, Daniel took the pocket dimension he had received by the middle-aged man and entered it with his spiritual essence. The next moment, he was standing as a wisp of spiritual essence inside the simple yet stable space within the ring. This space was the first place in which Daniel had managed to achieve comprehension of spatial essence, so he was extremely familiar with it. To a point where he could feel every bit of it even from the distance. Suddenly, Daniel raised his gaseous dot-like arm, and above it, the wind essence sphere he had just finished to create appeared. The moment the sphere appeared in the empty space, a basic atmosphere started to form around it. Daniel's comprehension of wind essence included the components of which the breathable air was composed, so it didn't take long for him to set a breathable atmosphere within the empty space, and regulate the power of the gusts of wind. He then took control over the space, and locked the wind sphere into a slow circulatory movement in mid-air. The entire space started to slowly fill itself with air composed by the appropriate amount of oxygen. After setting the dimension's gravity and air pressure, Daniel retracted his spiritual essence from the pocket dimension, and entered it with his entire body. He was fully capable of breathing, and he could feel the wind brush against his skin. But he couldn't feel the faintest presence of humidity in the air. He was sure that if he had installed the water sphere along with the wind sphere, he could create a perfect replica of the air in the outside world. Happy enough with the result he had obtained, Daniel left the pocket dimension once again. Noticing that the middle-aged man was still busy, Daniel suddenly disappeared from where he was standing, and reappeared inside the castle's ground. He then focused on the control he had over the formation. Outside of the castle, the middle-aged man was muttering by himself, "Not this one. This one is too chaotic. This one is basically the inside of a volcano. Too small." He went on for a few minutes, before finally. "Ah, this one is close enough," he said after managing to find an appropriate pocket dimension that could contain the castle. Prepared to show off in front of Daniel, the middle-aged man looked back up. But the castle was gone. Only the figure of Daniel could be seen, standing alone just 100 meters away from him, exactly where the castle was only a few minutes ago. The middle-aged man teleported in front of Daniel, and looked at him sideways. After noticing the smug expression on Daniel's face, he said, "Try not to ascend to higher plane by sheer satisfaction. I already suspected that the castle had the ability to teleport. I just didn't expect you had the necessary level of comprehension of space required to use that part of the formation." He then paused, before continuing in a slightly disheartened tone, "I supposed I shouldn't have expected that you would spare me the embarrassment of boasting about something you can already do. Kids have no respect for their teachers nowadays. That's because you've left one of my friends inside chaotic space for days," said Daniel with a self-righteous tone. Contrary to Daniel's expectations, the middle-aged man started to snicker. After a few seconds, he said, all right. That was my fault." After the unexpected apologies, Daniel found himself being teleported 3 different times in the span of half a second. Before he could think of something to say, he was back in the middle of Dresden. "Go register to the Legion. The sooner you take care of that, the more time you have to complete your assignment," said the middle-aged man. Daniel nodded at him in response, and before he could ask anything to him, the middle-aged man handed a key flag over to him and said, "Call me once you are done with your assignment." He then disappeared into thin air. Daniel entered into the pocket dimension with his spiritual essence, and went to find the rest of his group. It was lunch time, so he expected them to be all together inside the castle. But when he entered the dimension, he found all of them scattered around the place. After landing on the floor, Daniel teleported everybody next to him and said, "Sorry, I should have warned you guys. I have added an atmosphere inside the ring the middle-aged man gave me, so that we could have breathable air after moving the castle inside." Alice seemed to be about to say something, but she was surpassed in speed by Rolly, which asked in an extremely surprised tone, "Is that a wind sphere you've made?" "One thing at a time," said Daniel, interrupting Rolly's enthusiasm. "First of all, I have changed my mind about the water sphere. When you are done with it, give it back to me, so that I can install it in this space. Regarding the treasury for storing essence spheres, I'll store only spheres made out of perfect comprehension, and use the semi-perfect ones to make this space as similar to the outside world as possible. Rolly and Alice immediately understood what Daniel was referring to, as Rolly had already exposed Daniel's plans to her. The rest of the group was completely oblivious, and seemed to need an explanation, but before they could ask, Daniel started talking once again. In order to participate in the gathering, I need to be officially part of the Krehan Empire. The easiest way to do that is by joining a group. I've picked a mercenary group called the Legion of Blood and Steel, which is basically the largest mercenary group in the Empire. You guys are free to follow me or stay in the castle," explained Daniel in a single breath. He then added, "I assume there will be benefits in joining a group. I'm certainly not going to stay in this castle to rot. I'm in," said Heimart with a decisive tone. The next one to talk was his cousin Legart, which said, "I have too many bets going with him, I can't stay here either." "I am definitely coming," said Alice in an amused tone. She had spent too much time renovating the castle, so she felt the need to go for the adventure. Contrary to Daniel's expectations, Imblin and Rolly both refused. "I have all I need to train here, Daniel. I can come out to aid you guys in any fight you encounter, but since we still have plenty of rank 4 beast cores, and you've given me a water essence sphere, I'll stay here most of the time to train," said Rolly in an apologetic manner. "I will be staying in as well. My main weaknesses are the poor proficiency with my weapon, and the lack of martial skills. And since we have a training room and a library," Imblin said, before letting her voice trail off into silence. She then added, "We will look after the kids as well." Daniel understood the reasoning of the two. They had all they needed to advance in their training, and they recognized that training was more important than go to the adventure. At least for now. It only took a brief look at the blonde young man to understand that he wasn't going to stay in the castle. In fact, he was already standing next to Daniel's wisp form, ready to go at a moment's notice. Daniel's gaseous shadow moved towards the castle's gate, and stopped only when he was 10 meters away from it. He then focused on the space, and created a one-way connection between the space inside the dimension, and the outside world. He looked back at Rolly and Imblin, and said, "You guys can use this tunnel to leave the pocket dimension at any time. If you find it blocked, then it means that it is dangerous and that you shouldn't come out." After a brief nod of confirmation, Daniel teleported everyone but Rolly, Imblin, and the two kids out of the pocket dimension, then he left as well. When he retracted his spiritual essence from inside the ring, he noticed the 4 members of his group standing all around him. "Okay. To the Legion of Blood and Steel recruitment office," he then said before turning towards a certain direction, and start walking. 20 kilometers east from Daniel's position inside a simple yet clean office, a man and a woman sat comfortably on 2 chairs. Between them was a wooden desk behind which the woman sat. She seemed to be in her 40s, and yet her athletic and attractive body could be barely hidden underneath the leather clothes she wore. Her platinum blonde hair reached her chin in big and messy waves, and her perfectly symmetrical facial features made her look like the kind of woman most young girls desired to grow into. The man that sat in front on the desk was the middle-aged man. "Where have you been? You were supposed to find someone to take to the gathering." "Not disappear for more than a week?" asked the woman. Slightly annoyed by the woman's reprimand, he said, "Relax for once, woman. I've found someone." The woman's brows arched in curiosity. She couldn't help but say, "About time. Who is it?" The eyes of the middle-aged man lit up as he said, "A damn freak, who that brat is. Twice as cunning as I was at his age, and 100 times more talented." The woman couldn't help but smile when noticing the way the middle-aged man talked about Daniel. She then turned back into her serious state, and said, "Your daughter got into trouble once again." She then paused for a moment, before explaining, she said that the young master of Rising Dragon School was pestering her again. So she broke his nose. Again, asked the middle-aged man. The woman nodded and said, again. You have to solve the matter for her. Before they come here and start making strange demands. Fine. Responded the middle-aged man. He then sighed deeply, and right as he was about to teleport away, he looked at the woman and said, how come when she does something stupid she is my daughter? But when she advances in her cultivation she is your daughter. The woman simply smiled, and said, see you at dinner. Chapter 72 Joining the Legion. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Dresden, Legion's Recruitment Office. 15.24 It took Daniel and the rest a full hour and a half to finally find the Legion's recruitment office. From the outside, the building didn't seem special in any way. Its structure was simple, and yet there was a constant stream of people that entered and left it at all times. Look at how many people are going in. The place must be packed. Why don't we come back later? Asked Lagarde with a dissatisfied tone. Except for Daniel, nobody else within the group was capable of feeling the feeble spatial essence that the building emanated. It's just past lunch hour. If it's this packed now, then it's only going to be worse in 1 or 2 more hours. Retorted his cousin Heimart. We should just go in now and be done with it. Don't worry, it's not as packed as it seems, said Daniel in vague manner. He then walked towards the entrance of the building and went in. The moment Daniel entered the building, his view changed completely, as he found himself being teleported into a pocket dimension. Its size was at least 5 times bigger than what the outside appearance of the building suggested. Daniel and the rest were now in an enormous lobby, inside which hundreds of people stood in ordered lines, and patiently waited for their turn to approach the various counters. There were also a few counters which had a shorter line, or no line at all. But no one dared to approach them, as they were respectively the counters to sign in for a mission, and the counter to report the completion of one. All of the people within the lobby were cultivators of a relatively high level. Daniel could not see anyone beneath the 5th rank of cultivation. The group of 5 walked towards one of the lines set for individual registration, and waited quietly. During the 2 hours of wait, Daniel had managed to roughly understand the process of registration by observing the people that preceded him. First of all was the bureaucratic registration, where one needed to provide all sorts of personal information. The second step was to be tested into one of the many testing rooms located on the opposite side of the lobby. The third and final step was to hand over the filled-out registration form, along with the test result to a second counter, where after a quick control, one would receive their first mission. After the completion of the mission, the person would become an official member of the Legion of Blood and Steel, and would receive his personal medallion along with the rights to accept missions, and use the Legion's discount in various shops within the Empire. It was finally Daniel's turn to register. He stood right in front of the counter and waited for the bored-looking old woman to speak to him. The old woman behind the counter simply picked a sheet of paper from underneath her desk, and handed it over to him. Fill this form. If you are mentally disabled and can't understand it, ask me. Or re-evaluate your choice of joining a mercenary group. She said with a robotic, and almost emotionless tone. Daniel looked down at the piece of paper, and read through it quickly. It was a regular registration form, similar to that he had had to fill in when registering for the Huntsman Guild back in Carolus. He was required to provide his full name, age, sex, birthplace, cultivation path and rank, past and current memberships to other groups, and a few other details. He picked up the quill pen and quickly wrote all the required informations on it. He then gave the paper back to the old woman, which put a big red stamp on it, and pointed at the section of the building in which the tests were conducted. Daniel took back the form and left the line. He then walked towards the doors that lead to the testing rooms. There was no line for the testing rooms despite the large amount of cultivators that were registering that day. Once Daniel went in, a middle-aged man approached him and said, "Your form," before extending his hand. After Daniel handed the four over to him, the man quickly read through it and led him into a testing room for spiritual cultivators. Daniel had decided to register as a spiritual cultivator for two simple reasons. Firstly, he wasn't sure if the tests would require him to enter in direct contact with another marshal, and secondly, was the fact that the middle-aged man that had helped him comprehend spatial essence, already knew him as a spiritual cultivator. The testing room wasn't a common square room. It looked more like a large corridor with multiple targets at the end of it. While looking at the form, the examiner said, "You've written in the form that you are adept in wind, water and lightning." "Show me," said the examiner while sitting on a chair placed to the side of the room. Daniel didn't want to show the full extent of his comprehension of the three elements, but he also didn't want to miss out on some benefit because he didn't show enough promise. From a standing position, Daniel slowly lifted his arms in the air and started to force his spiritual essence out of his palms. In front of him, three elemental spheres were created out of nowhere, and positioned in a rectangle dot-like formation. The one on top shined with white light, and released electricity in the surrounding air constantly. The one on Daniel's left was a sphere of dark ice, around which a thin mist could be seen rotating slowly. The third and last sphere was a ball of rotating gases, from which a faint sound of whistling could be heard. These three floating spheres got closer and closer to each other, until they were no further than a few centimeters from each other. They then merged into a more powerful big ball that resembled a small icy planet, which was being constantly tempered by lightning bolts, rain, snow, and sharp winds. Suddenly, this planet-like sphere seemed to lose its solid composition and, as a liquid projectile, it was sent towards the targets at the end of the corridor. The attack was over in an instant. When the mist thinned and the light stopped flashing, the examiner noticed what was left of the wall on the other side of the room. The wall was completely covered by a thick layer of ice. On the ice surface, thousands of cuts could be seen, and behind it, large charred craters caused by the lightning strikes could be seen. Daniel turned to look at the examiner, and found him standing with his mouth wide open. The small chart on which he was writing his thoughts was on the ground, and a quill pen dangled between the tips of his thumb and index. What Daniel had shown was 60% of his comprehension of the elements, but instead of showing his proficiency with each element at a time, he mixed them and demonstrated his fighting ability. Barely able to regain his wits, the examiner picked up his papers and wrote something, and put a stamp on them. "Take this, and show it to the lady behind the counter reserved for missions assignment," said the examiner while handing a paper over to Daniel. On it were written a few comments and an evaluation of his talent. Underscore 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 applicant's age 15 aptitude level. SSS comment. The applicant showed great talent by learning 3 different types of essence, amongst which lightning, wind, and water. It is this examiner's opinion that, had the applicant spent his time by comprehending a singular essence instead of 3, given the appropriate resources, he would have reached a nigh-perfect comprehension of either of the 3 aforementioned. Proficiency level. S. Lightning essence, S. Water essence, S. Wind essence, comment. Taking age, cultivation rank, variety, and comprehension of the 3 essences learned into consideration, it is this examiner's opinion that the applicant possess prodigy-level proficiency in comprehension, aptitude, and control over water, wind and lightning essence. Control level. SSS comment. The applicant showed an impressive level of control during the demonstration. Instead of making a separated demonstration for each essence, he produced all 3 at the same time, mixed them, and proceeded with the attack. The mixed essences were stable, and the power input was indistinguishable between the 3. Underscore 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 underscore. Satisfied by his evaluation, Daniel left the testing room and went towards the counter indicated by the examiner. When Daniel left the testing room, he noticed that, of his group, only the blonde young man was left in line. It was his turn, but instead of filling his form, he looked at it quietly. As if suddenly remembering something important, Daniel teleported next to him and helped him fill the form. Unable to think of a name to put in the form, Daniel created a nickname by mixing the two parts of his title, turning Jakrai into Jirai. Once finished filling Jiraiya's form, they waited for another one of their group to come out of the testing room. They didn't have to wait long before Alice exited the testing room and approached them. But before she could talk, Daniel said to her, "How was your test conducted?" Slightly confused by the sudden question, she said, "I've entered a training room and sparred with the examiner. He then told me to hand over both my evaluation and my details to that counter, and receive my first mission." Daniel turned towards Jirai, and said in the Assam language, "Go into one of those rooms. Someone will approach you right after, and ask you to hand your papers over. After he'll be finished verifying the details of your papers, that person will want to spar with him. When you are done sparring, he will hand your papers back to you, along with your evaluation. Once you have both of them in your hands, leave the room and come back here." He was about to turn around and finish his registration, when he added, "No matter what, don't talk. It's better you pass for a quiet weirdo than risk being considered a spy of the Asams." "It's never going to work," muttered Alice as she stood next to Daniel, and looked at Jirai walk towards the training rooms. The two then turned towards the counter and went to finish their registration. The line in front of the second counter wasn't long. Only members who were looking for a new mission were allowed to wait there, so most of the people in line were those who, like Daniel and Alice, wanted to receive their first mission. After waiting in line for 10 minutes, it was finally Daniel's turn. The lady behind the counter looked back at him with a bright smile and said, "Member or applicant?" "Applicant," responded Daniel calmly. "Your papers, please," said the lady with a slightly cheerful tone. Daniel handed over his papers to the lady, which after reading through them for a minute or two, showed a shocked expression. She then looked back at Daniel, and said, "Before assigning a mission to you, I need to know if you want a mission that can be completed in solitary, or prefer a group mission." "I would prefer a group mission," responded Daniel immediately. The mood of the lady seemed to suddenly improve. She then said, "Splendid, there are many groups that are currently looking for members. Let me list the recommended ones." Just as the lady was about to get up and go fetch the details regarding the best groups within the Legion, Daniel said, "That won't be necessary. I'll be creating my own group. Can you help me with that?" Visibly losing half of her cheerfulness, the lady smiled at him and said, "Of course." The reason for the changes in the lady's state of mind was simple. She had understood Daniel's promise by the evaluation she had been given, and in case she managed to convince a prodigy like him to join a pre-existent recommended group, she would be praised by her superiors. The recommended groups were nothing more than groups to which safer and closer missions were given. These groups were easier to control, and that would increase the chances that their talented members would not abandon the Legion at some point in the future. The lady looked at Daniel with slight disappointment, and handed a new form over to him. She then said, "Fill this with the group's name, starting members' names, ages and cultivation ranks." Inside Daniel's mind, a never-before-seen window had suddenly appeared. Underscore 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 group of the Karmic System's wielder. Name. Group of the Karmic System's wielder, provisory, number of members, details. Overall karma. Underscore 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 shared karmic effects, details, reputation, details. Underscore 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 underscore. Chapter 73 First Group Mission. You are listening at novelfull.audio. What is this? Muttered Daniel in his own mind. Trying to hide his reaction and surprise as best as possible, Daniel said, I'll go over there to fill this. I haven't thought about the group's name yet, and I don't want to block the line. He then stepped away from the counter. When Daniel stepped out from the line, he immediately noticed that Heimart had finished with his testing. So he walked directly towards him, and before Heimart could say anything, he put his hand inside one of his large pockets, and disappeared. Inside Heimart's pocket, only a small ring had been left. Now inside his pocket dimension, Daniel said within his mind, Sua, do you know what this is? It's one of the locked parts of the karmic system. It unlocked the moment you showed the intention of creating a group. Duh. Responded Sua, without abstaining from using his usual mordacious tone. He then said, I thought we talked about this already. That's how the system works. You are a bit slow, aren't you? Slightly annoyed by Sua's derogatory way of talking, Daniel said, I meant to know what it can do. You can create a group, use it to gain karma, and spend that karma to buy effects for the group. So that you can gain more karma. And buy more effects. And gain MO. Explained Sua before getting stuck at the end. Okay, I get it. My bad for asking you. Said Daniel with a tone filled with exasperation. He then focused on the details of the shared karmic effects, and a new window opened within his mind. Underscore 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 shared karmic effects LV1 karmic aura LV.1 equals 100,000 kp. Passive. When in the presence of the karmic system's wielder or inside the group's ground, the group members will obtain a battle prowess enhancement of 1%. An additional 1% per level. Max LV 50, time is precious LV. 1, group, equals 500,000 kp, passive. When in the presence of the karmic system's wielder or inside the group's ground, the group members will obtain a boost in their speed of progression of 5%. An additional 5% per level. Max LV 20, Karma X Luck, Group, equals 2 million kp, passive. 10% of a group member's individual karma, becomes part of their overall luck. Underscore 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 accumulate 5 million karma points to unlock shared karmic effects LV. 2 underscore 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 underscore, similar to my own system upgrades. But for the entire group. Muttered Daniel in surprise. With a clear mind, Daniel left the pocket dimension, and appeared once again right next to Heimart, which was currently standing in line. He said to him, Heimart, let's all take the same group mission. Here, after handing over the group creation form to him, he continued, create a group and we'll join it. You know. We all recognize that you have the maturity to lead a group. Why don't you do it? It's not like we wouldn't join. Said Heimart while taking the empty form off of Daniel's hands. Underscore 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 Highmark wants to join group of the Karmic Systems wielder. Underscore 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 underscore. A faint smile grew on Daniel's face, as he muttered in a low tone, "You are welcome then." "What do you mean?" asked Highmark confusedly. Daniel ignored the question and said, "It's all right, you are more charismatic than I am. People are more likely to join if you are the leader. I can do the recruitment if you want." "Sounds good to me," said Highmark while casually filling in the form. "What name do we use?" After thinking for a moment, Daniel said, "It doesn't matter, you pick." Before he could finish, Highmark interrupted him. "If you are about to say that you want me to pick the name, I suggest you change your mind. I have hundreds of possible names in mind, but they are all names I would use to mess with Legart. So if you don't want me to call us, my name is Legart and I am looking for tender companionship. Then you better pick one yourself," he said with odd earnestness. Not knowing whether to laugh or sigh, Daniel thought about it for a minute, then said, "We are adventurers and we have particular objective. How about calling our group the Aimless Adventurer? Highmark pretended not to hear him, and said, "What about, pinch my buttocks and call me SL? I'm serious," said Daniel, interrupting Highmark's train of thought, which was spiraling out of control. Highmark started to giggle, before saying, "He. I know. I've already written it." He then waited in line quietly. The line for completing the registration had elongated in the past half an hour, just like Highmark had predicted. That had forced Daniel and Highmark to have wait for a while before their turn. 20 minutes later, Daniel was still standing quietly in the middle of the line, when a beautiful-looking girl in her early 20s approached him from the side. She stopped 2 meters in front of him and said, "Hi." The news that an extremely talented spiritual cultivator was joining the Legion reached my ears. "So, I've personally come to meet you and invite you to join my group, the Bloodletters." "It's okay, I already have." Daniel tried to explain that he already had a group, but before he could manage to, another young man approached from the distance. This young man wore practical clothes, but considered the total lack of protections on it, Daniel could guess that he wasn't a martial cultivator. He slowly approached from behind the girl with an aloof look on his face. What does a genius in spiritual cultivation have to do with a group of assassins and archers? He then turned to look at Daniel and said, "Greetings, my name is Bijo and I am the part of a group called Artifacts of Magic. As you might have guessed, we are a group exclusively composed of spiritual cultivators, just like you. Would you like to join us?" It was at this very moment that a weird smile appeared on Highmark's face. He turned to look at the two that were inviting Daniel to join their groups, and with an extremely serious face he said, "I am afraid that won't be possible. He already agreed on joining my group." "Who are you? And what group are you from?" asked the young man. Highmark's chest swelled with pride as he said, "My name is Legart, and my group's name is Slap My Ass and Cal NPFH." His joke was promptly interrupted by Daniel's elbow, which had struck his stomach with just enough force to shut him up. "The Aimless Adventurer," he said while rubbing his stomach with his hand. He then turned around while muttering, "Too serious. It's no fun messing with you." Daniel looked at the lady behind the counter, which once noticed his eyes on her, immediately looked away. From her reaction, Daniel had gotten a clearer idea of what had happened. The lady behind the counter had told a few representatives of the recommended groups about him, so that they could invite him personally. She wouldn't have bothered with doing that if he had simply formed a group on the spot, but once she noticed that he had left the line to talk to his friends, she took the chance to spread the news about the appearance of a prodigy of spiritual cultivation. Daniel turned to look at the two and said, "Thank you for your invitations, but I am afraid that what he said was true. I already have a group. It's understandable. But since you are still in line to complete your registration, it's not too late for you to change your mind. That's why I have approached," said the young man with a calm and polite tone. He then continued, "Just know that the benefits that you can obtain by a newly formed group cannot be compared to what you would obtain from joining us." The beautiful young girl took a step forward, interrupting the young man's final sales pitch. She joined her arms in front of her chest, squeezing her half-exposed breasts in between them, and said while tilting her head to one side, "What does his group have that my group doesn't?" Daniel smiled at the girl, and extended his hand towards her. He then said, "I'll show you." Intrigued by his words, the girl extended her hand as well, and tried to grab Daniel's hand. Unfortunately, she failed. The girl felt embarrassed at first, but the more she tried, the more she realized that there were invisible powers working against her. Next to her, the young man observed the scene with eyes opened wide in shock. He already knew that what was happening had something to do with spatial essence. He was too shocked to say anything. No matter how much the girl tried, the direction her hand went was always different from the one she meant to move it towards. After 5 minutes of failed attempts, the girl finally gave up. She crossed her arms in front of her chest, and observed how Daniel extended his arm towards Heimart, which grabbed it without the slightest problem. "How?" she said with dubious tone. With a derisory tone, the young man said, "It's because he wants to. He won't join your group because he doesn't want to." He then nodded respectfully at Daniel before turning around and leaving. The beautiful girl immediately picked up on the meaning of the young man's words, and with an irritated expression, she turned around and left as well. 5 hours later, in a restaurant just outside of the recruitment office. "I can't believe that it took so long," said a dispirited Lagarde. Alice looked at Jirai and said, "I can't believe that his testing went without a problem. And his evaluation as well. We knew he was good, but I didn't think he was that far from us." Suddenly, the sound of Heimart clearing his throat interrupted the group's train of thoughts. He stood up and said, "Ladies and gentlemen. Our first mission as a group." He then slapped a white sheet of paper above an empty part of the table. "Just tell us what it is." "I am too tired to read," said Lagarde before cowering on the wooden table. Heimart sat back on his chair and said, "Fine. It's a hunting mission. We have to go to a place called the Forest of Towering Rocks. There have been several incidents there, whose reports claim that a high-ranking beast had kidnapped or killed the humans that traversed it. We are to go there, and investigate the matter. The case is not private to our group, and will be assigned to 19 more groups. We can collaborate with one another if we want to, but only one group can get the merit for it." "How far is this forest?" asked Danny calmly. Heimart turned towards him and said, "About 9,000 kilometers north-east from here. Do you think you could teleport us there?" "I am not sure. I don't know what would happen to me if I ended up teleporting into something solid like a large rock. My cranial cavity might fill with stone and I could die instantly," explained Daniel with uncertainty. After spending a moment in silence, Heimart asked, "What about teleporting an entire section of space along with the air around you, and the ground under your feet? Or maybe teleport to a place high in the air?" "It would work theoretically, but I don't have the comprehension necessary to teleport that far. I could lose control over space and reappear on the other side as a fine red mist. You guys would be trapped inside the pocket dimension forever," said Daniel dispiritedly. Alice interjected and said, "We'll go on foot then. It's just going to take us a week, so it's not a big deal." "Very well, do we all agree that we depart tomorrow morning?" asked Heimart while looking at the members of the group. After a series of quick nods, the group resumed eating their dinner. Chapter 74 Mystery of the Forest of Towering Rocks Part 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 4 days later, entrance of the Forest of Towering Rocks. 21.45 Whoa. This place is beautiful, said Lagarde, mesmerized by the beauty of the scenario that appeared before him. Daniel and the rest of the group were standing at the edge of a thick forest, and in front of them, a large expanse made out of thousands, if not tens of thousands of tall and thin rocks formed the forest of towering rocks. The place was a common crossing point between different sides of the empire, so it was usually filled with crossing merchants and travelers despite its resemblance to a labyrinth made out of stone. But due to recent news that a high-ranking beast had kidnapped and killed people, the place had become much less populated. The only groups that traveled this path were mostly those powerful enough to not fear a high-ranking beast, or the numerous groups to whom the Crehan Empire had assigned the investigation to. Thanks for taking us here by flight. We would only be halfway if it weren't for you, said Heimart to Daniel. Daniel sighed deeply, and while shrugging his shoulders he said, "Don't worry about it. Better to spend 50 hours flying by myself, than listening to your cousin ask to stop every 20 minutes. Heimart couldn't help but smile, and say, "True. And at the same time we got 3 days of vacation in the creepy castle. You guys should have trained," responded Daniel while looking back at him with narrowed eyes. Heimart responded through gritted teeth, "We tried to. Imblin never got out of that training room. I've tried to spar with Jirai, but that guy is crazy. It's worse than practicing with the dummies. Anyway, let's set camp. We'll investigate tomorrow." After a quiet night, morning came once again. "We have to find the location and time in which the attacks took place. Also, we could use the help of groups from other factions. We can't ally with other groups from the Legion, as the Legion rewards only one group, but nobody said we can't make an alliance with a group from another power," said Alice while looking at the other members of the group. "We should split into 2 groups," said Daniel decisively. Heimart looked at him and said, "How do you think we should split? You, Lagarde and Jirai should go look for groups willing to ally. I'll enter the rocky forest with Alice to gather informations," he said after a minute of consideration. He then added, "You still have my key flag. If something happens, I'll teleport next to you in a matter of seconds. So try not to call me when you are surrounded by other objects." Once agreed on how to split, and which group would take which job. Lagarde, Heimart, and Jirai departed towards the edge of the rocky maze, while Daniel and Alice followed the cleared paths that lead inside. The forest of towering rocks already covered an immense area, and the fact that the numerous rocks made the paths curve continuously, only made exploring it a harder job. After a full hour, Daniel and Alice had only gone through 30 kilometers into the rocky forest. Suddenly, they both heard voices coming from further into the path. "It's this way, I tell you. I've really seen it," said a voice in a high-pitched tone, seemingly belonging to a child. A hoarse voice responded to the first one by saying, "Quit playing with your old man. I just want to get out of this damned forest and reach Kripke." The second voice seemed to belong to a man in his mid-40s, and it sounded like he was chewing on something. Daniel and Alice proceeded further into the forest, and after the 7th turn, they found a 5 to 6 years old boy followed by a fat middle-aged man. They were both at the head of a cart, next to which 10 guards walked orderly in formation. The moment Daniel and Alice appeared in front of them, the guards immediately walked in front of the two and formed a wall of protection. "Excuse us, sir, you seem like someone that would travel through this forest often. May we ask for a few informations?" said Alice politely, trying to make the guards drop their fighting stance. "It's all right," said the fat man. He then walked past the barrier of guards and said, "Ask away. It's been 2 weeks since we've been in here, a bit of new company doesn't hurt." Alice smiled at him and bowed gracefully. She then removed her hood and said, "We have been sent here by the Legion to investigate the accidents that happened in the forest. Could you tell us something about that?" "Oh, the Legion," said the fat man with a surprised expression. He then swallowed whatever he was chewing before, and continued, "Of course. The accidents have started about 8 months ago. At first, Merchant reported the disappearance of members of their caravans. It was only after a couple of similar incidents happened that a few mercenary groups started to send searching parties to look for the bodies. I assume that a few bodies have been found, commented Alice before asking, what can you tell us about their deaths? Not caused by humans. From what I know, not one clean cut, puncture or sign of human magic arts were found in the places where the bodies have been found. That's why simple homicide was ruled out, and the conclusion that a high-ranking beast was the culprit was formulated. Responded the fat man patiently. What caused the victims' deaths then? Alice asked in confusion. All the injuries suggested that the cause of the death had something to do with trauma caused by the collision with rocks. Responded the fat man. Alice's face twisted in a deeper confusion. She then asked rocks. You mean that rocks were the weapons that caused all those deaths? With no exception. With no exception. One was impaled by a tall and pointy rock, another had his thoracic cage destroyed due to being sent flying against a stone wall, a third person was found buried by tons and tons of rocks, and so on. Responded the fat man while slowly brushing his chin, trying to remember as many details as he could. This is all very useful information, you have our most sincere thanks. Please, tell us if you have noticed anything weird that could be of help. Said Alice through a kind smile. Weird. Something weird. Well, there is something odd. It's about the victims. None of the merchants, guards, or travelers were ever touched. In fact, the only victims were unknown people that were hired as bodyguards by the merchants. I know it doesn't say much, but I've always found that odd. Said the middle-aged man with an uncertain expression. He seemed to have pondered often about this particular part of the mystery. It is indeed odd. Thank you once more, sir. If there is nothing else, we'll let you proceed your crossing in peace. Once again, Alice thanked the man while bowing elegantly. When Daniel and Alice were about to leave, the kid said, Dad, tell them about the weird little snake I've seen. Shut up, boy, don't make them waste time. He said before turning towards Daniel and Alice to say, Excuse my son, it's been a while since we've been inside this place. And he has a fervid imagination. Daniel, which until now had stayed quiet, looked at the fat man and said, It's all right, sir, we don't mind. He then turned towards the kid and said, What was weird about that snake? Was it big? His tone was playful, and showed interested in hearing the kid's story. No. It wasn't big. It was only this big, said the kid while raising his arms and parting his hands of about a meter. The strange thing is that it looked like his skin wasn't covered in scales. But rocks. Said the kid with passion. Haha, that must have been cool to see. Said Daniel to the kid, before looking at the fat man, once again, Thank you for your time, sir. Have a safe travel. He said with courtesy. He then walked past the group along with Alice and disappeared into one of the carved paths. What do you think? Could it be that it was a spiritual cultivator adept in earth essence? Asked Alice once out of earshot. Daniel kept walking forward and said, I don't think so. If what that guy said is true, then the stones weren't directly used as weapons. One thrown against a wall, one buried, and one impaled. If it was someone adept in earth essence, why not create spikes of stone under their feet? Or throw the spikes at them? So, it was a high-ranking beast. A beast at the 5th or 6th rank wouldn't be any less intelligent than the two of us. It would certainly have the brain to stage those kinds of deaths. Responded Alice with a matter-of-fact tone. Might be. Let's find somebody else to ask to. Said Daniel before suddenly increasing his movement speed. Southern border of the forest of towering rocks. Jirai, Heimart and Legart were currently facing a team composed by 10 people. They were all at the 5th rank cultivation, and from their attires, one could tell that they were all spiritual cultivators. Once the three of them approached the group of spiritual cultivators, one amongst them immediately looked in their direction, and said, "Who's there?" "Members of the Legion. Sent here, just like you, to investigate the disappearances and deaths within the forest," said Heimart as clearly as possible. Half of the group approached Heimart's party, and stopped only when they were only 2 meters away from them. After they stopped, a young woman walked to the front of the group and said, "My name is Lipa. I am in charge of aiding this group of recruits in completing their first task. We belong to a group called Explorers of Dreams, and we are part of the Magical Covenant." She then paused and waited for Heimart to introduce his group. Heimart straightened his back and said, "My name is Heimart, and along with these two, and 2 more companions, we were sent by the Legion of Blood and Steel to investigate the strange events that took place here. Our group is called the Aimless Adventurer, and we split in order to gather informations, and find allies amongst other mercenary groups." The young woman responded through a serious expression, "If it an alliance you seek from us, I am afraid we have to decline. We've already made arrangements with another group from the Legion. In fact, we were waiting for their arrival." "That's unfortunate." "Very well, we will be on our way then," said Heimart while nodding politely. But before he could leave, a group of 7 people appeared behind them. Amongst these 7 people, only one wore light clothes, while the other carried heavy armors and large weapons. "Who are these people?" asked a muscular-looking man covered in armor. On his back, he carried a large sledgehammer. "A group from the Legion called the Harmless Adventurers," said a girl that stood within the group of spiritual cultivators. "Ha ha ha. What kind of name is that?" asked the muscular man. Irritated, Lagarde looked at the girl who had made fun of them with a look filled with malice, and said, "It's the Aimless Adventurer. It's unladylike to not clean your ears." The muscular man clearly had a close relationship with the girl, so the moment he heard Lagarde embarrass her, he turned dead serious and said, "It's not that big of a deal. We could always do something to make you guys fit your name better. Hold on. This is all a misunderstanding. We proposed an alliance to this group from the Magical Covenant. They refused, so if you let us through, we'll take our leave," said Heimart, trying to pacify the situation. "But here is the point. You guys are a group from the Legion, just like us. Therefore we are competitors. And now that guy insulted my girlfriend. We could go on our way and maybe stumble upon each other later, or solve it right here, right now," said the muscular man while grabbing the big sledge-hammer from behind his back. Before Heimart could say anything, Jirai unsheaths his single-bladed sword, and stepped towards the group of warriors. The situation had gone out of control, so all Heimart could do was to limit the damages. He looked at Jirai and shouted the only 2 words of the Assam's vocabulary that Daniel had recommended every one of them to know. "Sid Starry!" shouted Heimart immediately. Jirai stopped, looked back at Heimart, and after a brief nod, he rotated his sword by 180 degrees and started to approach the group of warriors once again. Chapter 75 Mystery of the Forest of Towering Rocks Part 2 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Jirai had never been a merciless killer. He had fought and killed before, but those kills had been forced upon him by his old master. So, whenever he did not receive a specific order, or was not convinced that his enemy wanted to kill him, he would usually spare their lives. Daniel was the one who had interacted with him the most, so he was aware of his nature. What Daniel was afraid of, was that Jirai would misunderstand an enemy's intention due to the language barrier. That was the reason why he had made sure to teach 2 specific words to each member of his party. These 2 words were, Sid, and Starry, and they meant, no killing. His intention was to let others judge the type of situation, and either tell him nothing and let him go all out, or tell him not to kill anyone. His plan had clearly worked, as after only a minute after Heimart's warning, 7 people lied unconscious on the ground. None of them was dead. Sheehan without a single drop of sweat on his body, Jirai sheathed his clean single-edged sword once again, and walked back towards Haimart. Haimart had tried to spar with Jirai more than once, so he expected such a result. Jiraiya's strong points were reflexes, time of reaction, and his excellent swordsmanship. In fact, he was so talented that he had shattered every single one of the Legion's records regarding martial cultivation. On a side note in his evaluation paper, the examiner had written exceptional talent in devotion in both cultivation and swordsmanship. One of the rare kind of people of which one could say the cultivation rank is holding the potential back. It is advisable to dedicate as much attention as possible to him. In front of the shocked eyes of the party from the Magical Covenant, Jirai joined back with his group, and together they left. "Thank you, ma'am, this was very useful information. We'll stop bothering you now, have a safe travel," said Daniel to a middle-aged woman through the open door of a carriage. The carriage resumed their travel after a courteous nod from the woman. It's always the same story. Bodies crashed against walls, head bashed in with large stones, walls splattered with blood and bodies at their bases. It's either a high-ranking beast, or a martial cultivator. But why would a martial cultivator of that level fight using no weapons or skills? Asked Alice with a confused tone. She and Daniel had asked to more than 5 different carriages and caravans. The answers they obtained were always the same. Same type of victim, same type of deaths, and same period of time. It might not be a matter of how and when. But why? Muttered Daniel in a pensive tone. Alice furrowed her straight brows and asked, "What do you mean?" Daniel turned to look at her, and said, "Think about it for a moment. People hired as guards are supposed to be the strongest within the group. And yet they were the only ones who got attacked. If an intelligent beast wanted to warn people not to enter his territory, why not kill the merchants?" "That's true," said Alice with a pensive tone. She then continued, "They would certainly be smart enough to distinguish them from the rest of the group. Or even remember the one who passed here more often." After nodding in agreement with Alice's remark, Daniel continued to present his doubts. A beast also wouldn't know if the person they are attacking belongs to a powerful group or not. Was it also a case that they exclusively attacked solitary cultivators hired as guards? I don't think so. We need to know more about the Vict. Suddenly, Daniel turned his head and faced north-west. "What is it?" asked Alice. Daniel closed his eyes, allowing his spiritual essence to leave his body and spread in the surrounding under the form of an invisible mist. After less than a minute, his eyes opened and he said, "There is a fight nearby." Before Alice could have any sort of reaction, she felt Daniel's hand grab her wrist tightly. The very next moment she found herself inside the pocket dimension. Once alone, Daniel teleported as close as possible to the place where the fight was taking place. He appeared near a large and tall rock, behind which the two parties were fighting ferociously. Daniel took Alice out of the pocket dimension, and the moment she appeared, she said with an angry tone, "You could have warned me. Now is not the time to." Before Daniel could finish talking, the large boulder behind which they were hiding suddenly shook. The fight had ended. Daniel ran around the boulder, and once on the other side, the results of the battle made his face fill with disappointment. On the ground, a man lay dead. He had been sent crashing against the large boulder, and he had broken his neck upon impact. The first thing Daniel did, was to sense the surrounding. The fight had just ended, and the killer could not have possibly gone too far. After 5 full minutes of sensing, Daniel felt nothing but Alice's ki, the dead man's dissipating ki, and earth essence all around. He turned to look at Alice and said, 3 seconds. It took only 3 seconds from when the battle ended to when I've started sensing the surrounding. And yet I've found no traces around. It's just like we've heard. No magic, no weapons. Just death caused by impact with rocks. What about wind? Now that you were closer, did you feel it? Asked Alice after a minute spent investigating the scene. No. I sensed the entire area during the fight. And no air currents were created or deviated. In fact, I haven't even felt a second person or monster. All I could feel was the ki released by that man, and the earth essence all around. Responded Daniel with a more confused tone than ever. Alice kept looking around the area for a few more minutes, but was unable to find anything unusual. It was only after kicking a rock in frustration that she noticed something. From underneath the rock, a meter-long snake slithered out, and dashed in a rectilinear motion into a small crevice between two big boulders. This snake's scales didn't look like the usual scales one would see in a normal snake. They were rugged and of a gray color, and looked very similar to normal rock. "Dan, come here!" shouted Alice out of the blue. She then said, "I've seen something. It looks like the snake the kid talked about." "That's quite the coincidence," responded Daniel before closing his eyes, and trying to sense the surrounding once more. After a few seconds, he opened his eyes and said, "I can't sense anything." "Are you sure you've seen a snake?" "Yes. It was just like the kid said. About 1 meter long and seemingly made out of rock," said Alice animatedly, slightly offended by Daniel's dubious tone. Daniel quietly lifted his arms, and pointed them at the two large boulders which vibrated in response. It was only after a full minute that the two boulders separated, and slowly rose in the air. Once again, the snake dashed out of its hiding spot and slithered towards another. But before it could find one, Daniel teleported next to it and grabbed it by the end of its tail. The snake wasn't strong by any means, and even once picked up by Daniel it barely put up a fight. Instead, it dangled from Daniel's hand without moving. The passive behavior of the snake allowed Daniel and Alice to have a better look at it. After a few seconds of careful observation, they both reached the same conclusion. A conclusion that left them with eyes opened in surprise. Not only were the snake's scales made out of rock, but also the rest of its body. There was no living mana within its body, and the only thing Daniel could sense from it was a slightly more concentrated earth essence. "This isn't a beast," said Alice with a stupefied tone. She then asked, "Do you know what it is?" "Yes. It's a true elemental," responded Daniel with a voice filled of amazement. Alice looked back at Daniel in confusion and asked, "A true elemental? Have you ever wondered where a portion of the essence treasures come from?" asked Daniel while taking a small stone out of his spatial ring. He then showed it to Alice and continued, "True elementals are entities born from pure essence. They can shape into whichever form they want, and can even cultivate through the consumption of essence. They can turn into beasts as well?" asked Alice after listening to Daniel's explanation. "Not exactly. They only resemble beasts, like this little one here," responded Daniel while touching the stone surface of the snake. "Then what about the other treasures? Like the feather and coral you've used to make the wind and water spheres? Or the stone you've used to make the lightning sphere?" she asked with a confused tone. "Not all treasures are born from pure and dense essence. Animals like corals and birds can be exposed to enough essence in their lives, that at the point of their death, they become essence treasures themselves." He paused for a moment, letting the new information sink in, then continued. "About the lightning treasure. Most lightning treasures are items that have nothing to do with lightning. A thunderstrike is basically a pure and concentrated amount of lightning essence that gets released all at once. Once hit by a thunderbolt, a portion of the lightning essence is bound to stay within the stricken objects. Most commonly exposed minerals, trees, or stones found in the ground. There is a book about this in the spiritual library." Suddenly, a large shade approached Daniel and Alice from behind and covered them completely. Before they could turn around, they heard a thundering voice that reverberated through their entire bodies and left them shaking. "I am impressed, human. Not many at your age would take interest into my kind," said the powerful voice. Daniel and Alice turned around slowly, and what they saw made a shiver run down their spine. In front of them, was an impressively big golem. Its height reached at least 30 meters, and like the little snake, he was completely made out of stone. Before they could even speak, the golem said something that made them realize how mild the previous comment had been. "I suggest you release my son. Now." Daniel couldn't help but swallow his saliva. Alice said with a trembling voice, "Is that a T.T. true elemental T.2? Big one?" responded Daniel through gritted teeth. He then looked at where the golem's two eyes seemed to be, and said, "We have reason to believe that your son is going around killing innocent humans." Suddenly the enormous golem started to scale down, and once reached the height of a common adult human, it stopped and said, "First of all, it was me. Secondly, innocent. That's hilarious." "What's hilarious about murder?" said Daniel, slightly irritated by the human-like golem's tone. Daniel didn't know the stages of cultivation of true elementals, but from the purity of the ki that was still dissipating from the body of the last victim, and the time it took for the golem to defeat him, Daniel could guess that his overall power was at the late 6th rank of cultivation. "Nothing is hilarious about murder. What's hilarious is that you humans would find any excuse to come and kill us. Even saving your lives," said the golem with a serious tone. It was at this moment that Daniel noticed the number above the golem's head. It was 15,623 and was of a dark green color. After taking a deep breath, Daniel said, "We won't accuse anyone without a reason. Let's talk." Chapter 76 Mystery of the Forest of Towering Rocks Part 3. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After taking a deep breath, Daniel said, "We won't accuse anyone without a reason. Let's talk." He then released the grip on the snake-like elemental, and allowed it to crawl back towards the human-sized one. "It doesn't sound genuine when said by someone who is in mortal danger," retorted the human-sized earth elemental, then paused for a moment before saying, "But I am listening." A faint smile grew on Daniel's face, which disappeared the very next moment. He asked, "What did you mean when you said, saving your lives?" "Exactly what I meant. I have witnessed the greed of humans for centuries. And I didn't care for it until I was alone. But I cannot allow my children to be exposed to that level of malice," responded the earth elemental. "I still don't know what you are talking about," said Daniel with his brows furrowed, and eyes narrowed in confusion. The human-like earth elemental looked back at the little snake that coiled around his leg, then said, "I knew every single one of the humans I've killed. Every now and then they would come accompanied by other humans, which they would them kill once entered the area." "Do you have any proof of this?" asked Alice with a dubious tone. Daniel immediately noticed how the elemental clenched his fists in rage after hearing Alice's question. He then heard it say, "Be glad I am still only talking. We are here to investigate. If what you say is true, show us some evidence so that we can go back and report the truth," said Alice with a slightly fearful tone. After harumphing loudly, the earth elemental remained quiet for a moment, then said in a calmer tone, "Very well. Follow me." The earth elemental turned around, and started walking at a human's pace into one of the carved passages. East border of the Forest of Towering Rocks. At the east border of the Forest of Rocks, a large camp had been set. Spread around the territory were dozens of large tents separated into differently sized groups. Each group of tents had large banners that indicated which powers the owners of the tents belonged to. Amongst the numerous groups, there were 3 different groups which belonged to the Legion, 2 that belonged to the Magical Covenant, and half a dozen groups which belonged to other high-level powers. In the middle of this large camp, was a massive tent inside which the various group leaders were sitting and discussing the course of action. Amongst them, sitting quietly in the area reserved for the group leaders of the Legion, was Heimart. Behind him Liegart and Jirai stood in silence. The Platinum Warriors offered to form an alliance. "Our terms are either the full carcass of the high-ranking beast, or the beast core. said a middle-aged man in shiny plate armor that sat in the area reserved for a power called mercenary horde. A young woman dressed in large dark green robes that sat on the side reserved for the alchemical circuit, stood up and said, "We, the proud bookworms, offer our support in exchange for the carcass of the beast. The group, the aimless adventurer, is willing to discuss an alliance. Our main interest is the beast core," said Heimart after standing up. For the next few minutes, various agreements were made between the various leaders of the groups. What was unfortunate, was that nobody had agreed on accepting Heimart's terms. Simply requesting for the beast core wasn't unreasonable. What others weren't willing to accept, was to consider Heimart's small group of 5 worthy of advancing demands towards the beast core. Every single leader within the large tent had entered along with their second and third in command, but differently from Heimart, they had left a larger group that was left outside in wait. Whenever a group leader approached Heimart to discuss terms, they would renounce after learning that his group was only composed of 5 people. Unable to find allies, Heimart, Jirai, and Legart were about to leave on their own and proceed the search for allies elsewhere. But when they were about to exit the tent, a scout which belonged to one of the groups rushed in and said, "Another body has been found. A fresh one. Deceased within the past 4. Lead us there," said the leader of the group to which the scout belonged. 2 hours later, site of the murder. Broken neck. No signs of fighting except for the bloodstain on the wall at about 4 meters of height. The victim was at the 6th rank of martial cultivator. The scene is similar to the others, but there is something different this time. "There are footprints," said the scout to the various group leaders. "Footprints?" asked one of the leaders. After receiving a nod of confirmation from his leader, the scout started to explain, 3 sets of footprints. Based on the size and depth, I would say they belong to a very heavy adult and 2 younger people. When I found the body, it was already cold but not yet rigid. The footprints were already present and looked much more defined than they are now. They might have witnessed the man's death. "Okay, let's follow the footprints then," said the scout's leader, which thanks to his group members' prompt actions, had had the chance to act as the tip of the spear for this company of mercenaries. The army of cultivators followed the trail for about an hour. The footprints became clearer and clearer the more they walked, until finally, they reached a narrow path right in between 2 extremely tall rocks. The path was curved, and it was not possible to see where it led. Because of the narrowness of the path, the various leaders of the groups decided to go first, accompanied by their seconds in command. Amongst them were Heimart, Legart and Jirai. The spearhead of the formation was the leader of the group to which the scout belonged. He carefully walked the path, and after less than 20 minutes of walking, he came out from the other side. In front of him was a ravine, and at the edge of the precipice, Daniel, Alice, and a human-like golem were looking down. One after the other, the rest of the group of cultivators appeared behind him, clogging the exit of the path completely. The 3 turned around after hearing the sudden noises. What they found was a large group of cultivators which belonged to many different groups. When the spiritual cultivators within the group noticed the true elemental next to Daniel, their eyes collectively opened in a mix of shock and greed. "Who are you?" asked the middle-aged man in shiny armor. Daniel looked back at him and said, "I am Dan Heel, a member of the Aimless Adventurer, a group related to the Legion." "What are you doing here?" he then asked. "We've followed your footprints until here from the scene of a murder," responded the middle-aged man. He then looked at the elemental and said, "What is that thing? It doesn't look like a normal summon." "It isn't," said one of the spiritual cultivators amongst the group, "it's a true elemental of the earth type. Given the purity of earth essence it emanates, it's old, intelligent, and extremely rare. Everything makes sense now. The injuries didn't match the style of humans and beasts. But they matched the way of fighting of an earth elemental perfectly." "Is what he said true?" asked the man in shiny armor to Daniel. Daniel gave a grim look at the spiritual cultivator, then looked back at the man in shiny armor and said, "There is a simple explanation to this. We fell." Before Daniel could explain, a voice within the crowd could be heard saying, "Look at his leg. It's not alone. Two earth elementals spawned together. There must be an extremely high level earth essence treasure nearby." With a deep and powerful voice, the earth elemental barked, "I dare you try to steal it, human mage." Everyone within the group that was below the early 6th rank of cultivation, couldn't help but feel a shiver run down their spine. Enraged by the elemental's tone, the spiritual cultivator that had just finished talking said, "He is our enemy. He killed all those people. We have to kill it." Alice walked in front of the earth elemental and said, "Wait. There is an explanation. He only kills bandits who pose as guards. Look at the bottom of this ravine. This is where the bandits ditched the bodies of the merchants and travelers they rob." What Alice said was the truth. At the bottom of the ravine, mixed with the red soil, were hundreds of rotting corpses. On these corpses, one could clearly see the cut injuries. Unfortunately, aside from making a few of them approach the edge of the ravine from the side, and take a look down to verify the Alice's words, nothing changed. "It doesn't matter. We have all been sent here to find and kill him. So that's what we will do," said the spiritual cultivator with a righteous tone. Furious by the spiritual cultivator's words, Alice looked back at him and shouted, "That's so unreasonable. If he were human, you would have called him a hero. We have to go back and ask our powers how to proceed. We owe him this much." No matter how convincing she sounded, there was nothing else to do. Everyone was aware of how precious high-level essence treasures were. So, blinded by greed, they had already gone past the point of reasoning. He is right. The elemental is guilty of killing those people. He had no rights to act as an executioner. And if we leave now, he might leave before we get a chance to come back with the new orders," said the man in shiny armor. He then took a step forward, unsheathed his sword and said, "Step aside, girl." "Why don't you make me?" asked Alice while unsheathing her short sword. Daniel stepped next to Alice, and while unsheathing his sword, he said, "Legion's 6th rule, paragraph 8. It is prohibited for groups that belong to the Legion to engage in a deadly fight. In case a fight breaks out, the attacking party will be considered accountable." The spiritual cultivator from before laughed and said, "Ha ha ha. We are not from the Legion, we have no reason to fear your warnings, kid. You've misunderstood. Who I was warning isn't you. It's the other members of the Legion. You don't get to have a warning," responded Daniel with a matter-of-fact tone. Suddenly, someone from the crowd said, "Hey, aren't these three from the same group as those two kids?" The idea of keeping the three as hostage immediately appeared inside the minds of the groups of cultivators, but before they could act, Daniel used spatial essence to switch place with Legart. He then touched Heimart's shoulder and teleported back next to Alice. He then teleported Jirai next to him from the distance. The whole thing happened in half a second. Fuck. That guy has comprehended spatial essence. Be careful when you attack, said the spiritual cultivator that had exposed the earth elemental. The middle-aged man in shiny armor looked sternly at Daniel and said, "You look like a talented kid. There is no need to lose your life like this. There are at least a dozen 6th rank cultivators here. And I know that none of you are above the 5th rank." The earth elemental looked at Daniel's group from behind. He then said, "You are honorable humans. But killing those people was my own decision, and I'll face the consequences myself." As he finished talking, his body started to grow and change shape. From an enormous human-like golem, the earth elemental turned into an incredibly large horned snake. Its length reached the 50 meters, and the earth essence of which his stony scales were composed, changed composition and turned into diamond scales. The giant snake-like earth elemental looked at the group of cultivators, and said with an intimidating tone, If you want me, come and get me. Chapter 77, A Battle for What Is Right. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After shouting intimidatingly, the giant snake-like elemental whipped his impressively large tail at the group of cultivators. Prepared for battle, two spiritual cultivators that belonged to the magical covenant summoned a thick wall of stone with an additional layer of ice as reinforcement. As the diamond-covered tail crashed against the ice wall, it splattered everywhere, sending shards of ice towards Daniel's group. These shards weren't out of the spiritual cultivator's control, as they curved in the air and flew straight towards Daniel and the rest at high speed. But before the shards could hit Daniel and the rest, various gusts of powerful winds appeared out of the blue, and deviated their direction once again. The various spiritual cultivators amongst the group started to engage the earth elemental. They alternated between creating shields of stone and ice to defend against its attacks, trying to control the ground underneath him to obstruct his movements, and try to condense enough fire and earth essence to produce magma in order to effectively damage the mineral-based body of the elemental. On the other side, Daniel and the rest saw the various martial cultivators that approached them with unsheathed weapons. A few throwing knives and arrows were sent directly towards Daniel, which, unable to shield himself against all of the attacks without revealing his powers in martial cultivation, was forced to teleport once again. He immediately switched position with the 6th-rank martial cultivator which had sent the knives at him. The moment he appeared on the cultivator's place, he witnessed that very cultivator turn around, grab his throwing knives in mid-air, and promptly avoid the arrows. Two different horizontal sword slashes came from Daniel's sides, and tried to divide his body into 3 parts by cutting his legs and neck clean off. With the reaction of a 5th-rank martial cultivator, Daniel managed to activate Stone Skin and parry the attacks. Unfortunately, the attacks were too powerful for him to block completely, so the 2 swords dug a couple of centimeters into Daniel's palms. To the 2 cultivators, it looked like Daniel had an impressive comprehension of earth essence. But the truth was that most of the damage had been parried by his own flesh. Stone Skin had mostly helped Daniel hide the fact that his body was extremely resistant. He rapidly gripped the 2 blades, pushed large amounts of spiritual essence to his hands, and turned it into lightning essence. He then sent an extremely powerful electric current flow through their swords and into their bodies, making them drop on the ground, completely stiff. He then summoned 2 spikes of stone in the air directly above the 2 paralyzed cultivators, and pierced their hearts, killing them on the spot. The ground shook as one tail whip after the other were parried by the jointed effort of the various spiritual cultivators. Closer to the edge of the ravine, Heimart and Legart were fighting together against a single halberd-wielding martial cultivator. Their power was significantly inferior, but the numbers and coordination of their attacks helped them even the battle out. Alice was capable of fending off the attacks of another 6th-rank martial cultivator by herself, but she wasn't capable of fighting back in the slightest. Her opponent was a tightly dressed woman which wielded a spiked whip. Her wide movements allowed Alice to easily predict her attacks, and thanks to her agile body, she managed to avoid most of them without getting hit. On Jiraiya's side of the battle, the result was completely different. At his feet, an heavily armored cultivator lied motionlessly. Copious amounts of blood gushed out of a cut at the base of his neck. In his hand, an unsheathed single-bladed sword from whose tip fresh blood was dripping. An ice spike sent at the right moment was all Heimart and Legart needed to overpower their enemy, and when one approached Daniel from behind, he teleported it right behind the cultivator that was facing the 2 cousins. The cultivator reacted quickly thanks to his surrounding awareness, and parried the magical attack just in time. He then moved his right leg back in order to avoid Legart's leg sweep. Heimart, who was currently standing behind the halberd-wielding cultivator, promptly kicked the back of his knee and destabilized him, forcing him on to fall on his knee. He then grabbed his spear, and after pulling it aside, he hit the cultivator's neck with a powerful elbow strike. Not missing a beat, the moment the cultivator bent forward after Heimart's strike, Legart wrapped his hands around the back of his head, and sent a devastating knee strike directly towards his face. With a broken nose, the cultivator could not help but drop his halberd and cover his face in pain. It was at this moment that Heimart grabbed the falling halberd, and tried to pierce the cultivator's back with it. The cultivator bent forward and sent a backward kick which hit Heimart's solar plexus heavily with his heel, making him fly 10 meters backwards. Legard immediately tried to finish the cultivator off by stomping on the back of his head, but the cultivator quickly moved his head to the side, and grabbed Legard's ankle. With a solid grip on Legard's ankle, he forced Legard to fall on his back by pulling his leg backwards, then crawled above him and wrapped his hands around his neck. Alice was in a dangerous situation as well. Her opponent was becoming increasingly more accurate with her whip, and after 2 minutes, numerous tears had started to appear on her clothes. Underneath these tears, a few bloody cuts could be seen on Alice's olive skin, which made her clothes stick to her body. Jirai noticed Legard's precarious situation, and when he was about to go help, 2 martial cultivator at the 6th rank engaged him in battle. Heimart had ended up on the middle of a group of martial cultivators dressed with the same attire, but before he could receive any attack, he was teleported right next to Legard. He then proceeded to rescue his cousin from the halberd-wielding cultivator. Daniel looked at the movement of Alice's opponent, and after a moment of observation, he formed a whip made out of water, and lashed it towards the woman. The whip wrapped around the woman's waist. He was about to electrocute her, but before he could do that, several throwing spears reached the exact place where he was standing. Once again, he was forced to teleport away. But before losing control over the water essence, he turned the water into ice and made a few spikes pierce into the woman's body. These spikes did not pierce the woman too deeply, but due to the large number, she couldn't help but fall on the ground. Alice dashed towards the injured woman, and as she was about to thrust her short sword into her shoulder, a great sword easily deflected her strike and sent her short sword flying in the air. After 10 long minutes of battle, Daniel and the rest of the group were exhausted. Daniel had already consumed thousands of karma points just to keep going, while the rest had already exceeded the restoration of their ki with the consumption, and were barely managing to hold their own against their opponents. Legard and Heimart were covered in sweat, and various bloody gashes could be seen all over their bodies. Jirai was limping backwards while parrying one attack after the other. Finally, Alice had a deep vertical cut on the side of her thigh, which disabled her ability to avoid her opponent's attacks effectively. On the other hand, thanks to Daniel's periodical support, the snake-like earth elemental had been able to solidly hit the group of spiritual cultivators, which, unable to defend themselves from a physical attack of that level, were thrown against the rocky wall or down the ravine. Unfortunately, not even the earth elemental was able to avoid all sorts of injury, as a few molten sections of his body could be seen. Around 30 bodies lied on the ground, and at least 2/3 of them were the elemental's victims. Daniel knew that he could not go on by himself forever. So, with a single thought, he upgraded Time is Precious to the 5th level, and started to produce spiritual essence at 5 times the original speed granted by the system. He pushed his spiritual essence out of his body, and focused it in 3 points. He then used the same technique he used to demonstrate his proficiency in lightning, water and wind essence during the evaluation. He formed 3 clusters of different types of essence, and after merging them in the middle, he created a large storm sphere double the size of a normal human's head. Every cultivator in the area noticed the powerful attack. A few shouts could be heard saying, "Look out," or "Stop him." But it was too late. After the 3 elements merged into the power of a storm, Daniel sent it straight towards the middle of the large group of cultivators. The ball of storm essence traveled so fast that it looked as if it had turned into a liquid form, and before the cultivators could evade, the sphere impacted heavily against the ground. Once the large sphere touched the ground, gelid winds and lightning strikes wreaked havoc in a radius of 15 meters, and when the flashes stopped, and the mist thinned away, the entire area had turned into a frozen land. Unfortunately, Daniel's 5th rank of spiritual cultivation wasn't enough to directly kill the powerful cultivators in the area. Nevertheless, many had been stuck in ice, and through it, Daniel could see various cuts and charred spots on their bodies. Every cultivator in the area looked at Daniel as if they were looking at a monster, as he had shown way more proficiency of lightning, ice and water than that he had shown during the evaluation, making use of up to 85% of his comprehension. More surprised than anybody else, was the earth elemental himself. He was an entity made of mana, so, recognizing the level of comprehension that a spiritual cultivator had towards an essence, was one of his innate abilities. The first to free themselves from the cages of ice, were the cultivators at the 6th rank, while the rest of the cultivators required the help of the spectating practitioners. The man in lucid heavy armor, which was one of the 2 cultivators that had forced Jirai into a disadvantage, pointed the tip of his sword towards Daniel and said, "Kid, I don't believe you have the enough strength to keep fighting. I suggest." The man's words got stuck down his throat, as he noticed 3 new spheres of essence form in front of Daniel. "Wait!" he quickly shouted. The merging of the 3 spheres stopped momentarily as Daniel looked back at him. The man in lucid armor sheathed his sword and said, "The Platinum Warriors surrender. We will report the situation to the mercenary horde and come back with new orders." Then, without waiting for Daniel's response, he turned towards his group members and said, "Let's go." He then left. Shocked by the sudden changes, the area quietened for a full minute. Until the leader of the group of which the scout belonged to took a step forward, and said, "We, the Quiet Arrows, will report to the mercenary horde as well, and come back with new orders," he said before leaving along with his group's only surviving member. "The Proud Bookworms will retreat as well. We ask that the members of the Aimless Adventurer will consider the alchemical circuit in case they'll decide to sell any sort of essence treasure," said the leader of the Proud Bookworms, convinced that the only reason Daniel and the rest had to defend the earth elemental was to put their hands on the essence treasure it kept hidden in the area. "As a sign of respect for our comrades from the Legion, the Night Blades will renounce on the mission," said a young man that bore a Legion's medallion. One after the other, every group collected the bodies of their fallen members, and retreated back into the narrow path between the 2 stone walls. Once alone, Daniel immediately went to heal his teammates. The one with the most severe injury was Alice. Her leg was bleeding copiously, and she looked pale and significantly weakened. Daniel pressed his palm against Alice's thigh and forced as much spiritual essence as he could into her body. He then turned it into milky-looking healing essence. Her injury quickly recovered, and after half an hour, no trace of it remained. Legart and Heimart were next. After healing his teammates, Daniel finally approached the earth elemental, which had now turned back into his previous human-like form, and was looking gently at his son. "I am sorry. This was all our fault," said Daniel in an apologetic tone. The earth elemental turned towards him and said, "What are you talking about? It was my own choice. Humans' life is too short to take upon themselves other people's mistakes." Chapter 78, A Mutual Agreement. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The earth elemental turned towards him and said, "What are you talking about? It was my own choice. Humans' life is too short to take upon themselves other people's mistakes. What are you going to do now? You know you can't stay here anymore, right? Each of the powers will find a reason to hunt you down," said Daniel to the earth elemental. The earth elemental turned his head around, almost as if taking a last look at his childhood home. He then said, "I will find a way to leave with my children. It won't be easy. We are not capable of hiding in plain sight like you do." Daniel was shocked for a moment. "How did you find out?" asked Daniel while smiling subtly. "Human. You can fool those cultivators with such a cheap level of comprehension of earth essence. But not me," responded the earth elemental with a matter-of-fact tone. It was at this moment that Legart approached the 2 from behind, and asked, "Who says you can't hide in plain sight?" He then looked at Daniel and said, "You've seen Daniel's ability in spatial essence. It is thanks to him that we can carry our base wherever we go. I am not familiar with humans' uses of spatial essence," said the earth elemental. Daniel looked at Lagarde, and once again felt grateful about the guy's gifts of spontaneity and straightforwardness. He then turned back towards the Earth Elemental and asked, "Would you mind if I showed you?" The Earth Elemental waved his hand slowly and said, "By all means," but before he could finish, he found himself within Daniel's pocket dimension. The space had been morphed according to Daniel's comprehension of space, so now, the area of the pocket dimension was thousands of meters wide. The only essence that the elemental was capable of feeling, was wind essence. The meter-long stone snake uncoiled from around the human-like elemental's leg, and after landing on the floor, it tried to slither above the smooth surface made out of spatial essence. Unfortunately, its snake-like shape prevented him from moving above smooth surfaces. The human-like elemental looked at him and said, "Stop playing around, boy." After hearing his father's reprimand, the snake-like elemental morphed into a kid the size of a 4-year-old boy, which after walking around for a bit, turned towards his father and said, "I don't like this place. I can't feel the earth." "Of course you can't. We are not home anymore," said the Earth Elemental in a comforting tone. "I trust you, human. And I agree that there is enough space for me and my sons to make a temporary dwelling here. But the complete lack of Earth essence is. We are not fit to live in this place." After a minute of consideration, Daniel took an Earth treasure out of his spatial ring and said, "You are made out of Earth essence. Your very existence is comprehension of Earth essence." He then paused for a moment, and showed the low-level Earth treasure to the two Earth elementals, which after feeling the faint Earth essence within, started to feel a little more comfortable. He then continued, "Help me comprehend Earth essence, and I'll be able to make a home for you here." The adult-like Earth cultivator laughed as if he had just heard the funniest thing in the world. He then said, "That's ridiculous. Comprehending Earth essence would take you decades. We can't wait that long. You are underestimating my talent," said Daniel while making the lightning sphere appear in his hand, and the wind sphere fly from high up in the sky, all the way over his head. "I can make a habitat identical to the one you've lived in. Right now." On the adult-like Earth Elemental's rocky face, what one would describe as a grin appeared. He then said, "Very well. I'll give you 3 days. But there is someplace else we need to go first. Mind taking us out?" Daniel indicated the one-way spatial gate right in front of the castle's entrance, and said, "You can leave whenever you want from there." He then walked into the spatial gate, and appeared at the edge of the ravine. The next moment, the father and son duo appeared as well. "Follow me," said the Earth Elemental while turning back into a giant golem form, and walking north. B.O.V. Legion's headquarters. Chairman's office. A middle-aged woman in blood-red clothes was sitting behind a desk. Her pitch-black hair were neatly kept in a single ponytail that reached all the way down her lower back. Her features were attractive, but her face was decorated with what looked like 3 small battle scars. She also wore an elegant blood-red eye patch, that she used to cover the eye she had lost years back in combat. Her expression was cold, and gave others the impression that there was no ruthless actions she wouldn't be capable of. She was currently looking at 2 files put side by side above her desk. These 2 files were the evaluations of Daniel and Jirai. "Which city were they tested in?" asked the middle-aged woman. "Dresden. Both examiners are trusted and experienced," responded a man in red leather armor which sat on a chair right in front of the desk. They showed up together at the recruitment building. They then ignored the groups listed as recommended, and entered a newly formed group called the Aimless Adventurer. "Tell me about the mission that was assigned to them," said the middle-aged woman with a demanding tone. "Their objective is to reach the forest of the Towering Rocks, investigate the disappearances and homicides, and if possible, to eliminate the culprit. The mission isn't a Legion exclusive, but a shared one. The Empire requested that each power put a limit of groups to assign the mission to. The limit has been agreed to be set at a maximum of 20 parties per power by the Syndicate of the Equal Opportunities. The man in red armor finished describing the mission without missing any detail. What kingdom is this? Carolus. I've never heard of it before. Asked the woman with a confused tone. The man in red armor took a large rolled-up parchment from the desk, opened it and laid it in front of the woman. He then pointed at one end and said, "A small kingdom within the Nestria continent." After listening the man's report, the woman looked at him with a serious expression and said, "He must have been teleported here. Otherwise he would have never reached this far. Not even in 500 years. Make sure they both come back safely." The man in red armor bowed politely and said, "Yes, ma'am." He then gathered his things from the desk, and left with a steady pace. Within an extremely large cave right in the middle of the rocky forest. "This is what we came back for?" asked Daniel without being able to look away from what was in front of him. In front of him, Daniel could see a fist-sized rock stuck in the middle of a stone wall. This rock was multicolored, which was caused by the fact that it was composed of many different types of minerals. It emanated a profound yet weak earth essence. It didn't take an expert to recognize this fist-sized rock as an essence treasure of the earth type. What surprised Daniel the most, was the odd feeling this rock gave him. It was as if he was staring at the source of earth essence itself, but he was not able to grasp any comprehension for it. Unfortunately, that was how essence treasures worked. They were like murky water. They would allow a person to perceive the essence, but grasping it directly from them was impossible. "That is what created us," said the earth elemental with a melancholic tone. Finally able to look away from the multicolored stone, Daniel turned towards the earth elemental and asked, "What do you mean?" That's a detail not many are aware of, but elementals aren't only born and grown through the consumption of any level of essence. In fact, the purer the essence is, the more we can grow. It took 3,000 years before I was able to gain consciousness. I was only the rock this treasure happened to fall onto one day, and its influence allowed me to evolve. He then took a small pause, before continuing, "When I've seen the two spheres that you've showed me, I understood that we were meant to meet, so that I could ask a favor from you," said the earth elemental. "You want me to make a perfect earth sphere?" said Daniel, guessing the earth elemental's intention. The earth elemental turned towards Daniel and said, "What this treasure lacks isn't profoundness, but power. In fact, it is the closest thing to perfect comprehension that you'll ever find. What it lacks, is the ability to produce larger amounts of pure essence. I don't have the level of comprehension required to create a sphere of that level," said Daniel with a matter-of-fact tone while indicating the multicolored stone. "I was born from this treasure. My understanding of this stone is as deep as your lack of it. I can help you reach a perfect comprehension of Earth. And you'll use that comprehension to give a hope for Earth elementals to thrive," said the Earth elemental, not hiding his emotional state at the end of his sentence. Suddenly, 4 more snakes crawled out of just as many cracks in the cavern walls. They were just like the first one they had seen. Low-level Earth elementals. "All right, I'll do it," responded Daniel after a minute of consideration. The truth was that he didn't need to think about it to begin with. The Earth elemental had a good morale, and had promised to help him gain a perfect comprehension of Earth essence. Daniel had absolutely no reason to refuse his request. Visibly happier, the Earth elemental walked towards the stone wall, and removed the Earth treasure stuck on it. At the same time, Daniel sat on the cavern's rocky floor, and started to condense Earth essence around the low-level Earth treasure he had obtained during the tournament. It took him no more than 30 minutes to finish creating a low-level Earth essence. He then handed the pocket dimension over to Heimart, and entered it along with the 6 Earth elementals. Once inside, Daniel immediately locked the newly formed Earth treasure on a free expanse of empty space just a few hundred meters away from the castle. The moment the Earth sphere was locked on the floor, a large amount of low-level Earth essence started to propagate in the area. After only a minute, an area of 1,000 meters in diameter had turned into a land covered in rock and incomplete soil. The earth elemental observed the area quietly, and after a moment, he said, "Your comprehension of earth essence is marginal. But this will do." The words of the earth elemental were true. Daniel's only chance of comprehending earth essence was when he had been stuck inside the underground cave, back when he had took part in his first hunting mission. So, his entire comprehension was limited to normal rocks and incomplete soil. Luckily, most of the rocky forest's composition was of a similar simplicity, which made this newly created area extremely similar to the one the elementals were used to. After storing the earth treasure within a few newly formed stones, the earth elemental walked towards Daniel and said, "My name is Burieth." Daniel bowed his head in a greeting gesture. "I like human. But I prefer Daniel," he said with a hint of sarcasm. After a moment, he smiled faintly and continued, "Welcome into our group." He then indicated the Black Castle and said, "That castle is our base. You are free to enter as you wish. There is a library inside which could help you comprehend more of the human world. If you are interested, that is." "I don't know how to read human words," said the earth elemental the very next moment. Slightly embarrassed, Daniel said, "Oh, right." Chapter 79 The Meaning of Perfect Comprehension. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 2 days had passed since Heimart's group departed from the rocky forest. Daniel was currently staying within the pocket dimension along with Burieth, and the younger earth elementals. Burieth had turned into a blank of rock and encased Daniel completely. It then started to change his mineral composition at a high speed. Daniel pressed his hands against the inside of the stone shell that encapsulated his body. From a small hole at the top, a ray of light shined through and bounced against the different colored minerals, which then split it into different rays of light and reflected from one side of the encasing to another, creating a show of multicolored lights. Daniel had spent the past 2 days sitting within this stone sphere, and comprehending every composition, density, and quality of the various mineral included within the worldly plane's earth essence. Now, he was finally done. In just 2 days, and at the price of more than 10,000 karma points, Daniel had managed to make his comprehension of earth essence reach the level of his wind, water, and lightning essence comprehension. "I am done," said Daniel in a low tone. Burieth turned back into his human-like form, and while looking at Daniel with a dubious expression, he said, "Show me." The next moment, Daniel forced a large amount of spiritual essence out of this body, then turned it into earth essence. In the air, a large multicolored stone started to form. The cluster of minerals started to quickly change in shape and formation, showcasing thousands of different minerals. Diamonds, corundum of various colors, fluorite, celestine and many others. The more time passed, the more shocked Burieth became. He could list every form of mineral by memory, and whenever he saw one, he would check it out of his mental list. After 2 long hours, Daniel had finally finished showing every mineral of which he had comprehended the composition, density, and qualities of. While Burieth stood in place looking at Daniel with a shocked expression, a small cluster of floating diamonds, hematite, and other precious minerals approached Daniel, and stopped right in front of his face. As he observed the beauty of these multicolored stones, he cursed at the fact that he would not be able to create one and keep it as his. As for every other form of essence, constructs made out of earth essence would dissipate once one would give up his control over the earth essence. This point had been a source of disappointment for about every single spiritual cultivator in the world. They would dream of comprehending metal essence and create mountains of gold coins, or comprehend earth essence and produce thousands of diamonds and other precious minerals, but each and every one of them, at some point, had to learn the cold hard truth. The first time Daniel had learned that a spiritual cultivator wasn't able of keeping a construct made out of essence, was back when he had been stuck into the underground cave. That time, Daniel had used his spiritual essence for the first time to create an earth golem, and after giving up his control over it, the golem had turned into an inanimate clump of stones and soil. The only reason why the golem had not dissipated in the air, was because in that case, he had simply took control over the surrounding stones and soil, instead of creating it out of his own spiritual essence and basic comprehension. Furthermore, an essence construct created out of a person's spiritual essence, would carry the unmistakable mark of that spiritual cultivator. Many ignorant cultivators in the past had tried to sell precious minerals and metals to the various shops, but after a quick look, the merchants would always be able to feel the spiritual mark within the items and realize that they were fake. Those cultivators all faced the same fate. They were arrested and prosecuted for fraud. The various schools always used the same example to easily explain this important flaw of spiritual cultivation. This example had to do with water essence, and it said that a person would be able to use constructed water to wash themselves, but they would not be able to drink it, as once they would inevitably give up control over it, the water would dissipate from inside their bodies. Daniel now possessed an impressive 90% of comprehension of earth essence, and he only needed to understand the various effects that other elements had on earth essence before he could reach a complete comprehension of it. Fortunately he had Buriath, an earth elemental born from pure earth comprehension. Buriath was weak to some effects other elements had on him, but that didn't mean he wasn't aware of their existence. Once out of his shocked state, Buriath said with faint surprise still present in his voice, "You weren't kidding." The sudden realization that his dream may not be as far as he had thought in the beginning, made Buriath so enthusiastic that he felt like screaming. Without wasting any time, Daniel formed a large generic rock, and started to expose it to the elements he had a comprehension of. With fire, he comprehended the melting and solidification of rock, and through the use of sand, he learned the process of vitrification. Through the exposition to water and wind, he comprehended erosion. With lightning he learned about electrical conductivity. Mixing stone, water and air, he comprehended a nigh-perfect state of soil, which only lacked an organic component. Finally, through the use of his various metallic weapons, he was able to learn hardness. These types of tests not only aided him in the comprehension of earth essence, but also in the comprehension of the secondary essence used to conduct the test. For example, in case Daniel ever decided to comprehend fire essence, he would not need to repeat these tests because he had already comprehended the effect he would obtain by mixing fire and earth. With wind he had learned the suppression of a flame, while with water he had learned extinguishment. Mixing fire, wind, and wood, he would be able to understand combustion, and so on. All these processes had taken another half a day, and in the end, Daniel had finally managed to reach a perfect state of comprehension of earth essence. The first thing Daniel felt, was the familiarity to the earth treasure hidden within the large stones. He now could understand every bit of comprehension it emanated, just like an earth elemental would. It was at this moment that Daniel realized something. His cultivation at the late moderate spiritual synchronization was not enough to create a perfect essence sphere. Daniel's perfect connection to the spiritual plane had changed the composition of his spiritual essence, making it similar in effectiveness to that of a cultivator at the mid-profound spiritual synchronization. Unfortunately, once he became capable of feeling the worldly perfection of the earth treasure, he understood that the purity of essence required to create a perfect sphere, would be no less than that at the early faint spiritual merging, or early seventh rank. In order to reach the power and effectiveness of an early seventh rank spiritual cultivator, Daniel would need to reach the mid-sixth rank at the very least. Daniel had read books regarding the formation of essence spheres, and in none of them the notion that one required to have reached the seventh rank of cultivation was written. The reason for that was simple to guess. Nobody under the seventh rank of cultivation would be able to have a perfect comprehension of an essence, and even if they did, it would be very unlikely for them to be able to find themselves in the possession of a perfect essence treasure. The third and last obstacle would be that nobody but Daniel would be able to produce such a relatively infinite amount of spiritual essence in a small enough amount of time, unless they were at the seventh rank of spiritual cultivation. Daniel still did not understand how precious a perfect essence treasure and his perfect comprehension meant together. If an essence sphere formed with 90% of cultivation could be used to buy a small city, a perfect essence sphere could be exchanged for a large and rich kingdom. Wars had been fought in the past for perfect essence treasures. Earth treasures were not only not an exception, but in fact, were one of the most valuable treasures of all. After all, Earth essence was the most difficult essence after time, sound, and space to comprehend, due to the thousands of minerals that one needed to encounter and familiarize with. Of course, all these informations were outside of Daniel's knowledge. His only understanding of the treasure's value was based on the fact that, in case it was successfully turned into a perfect essence sphere, it would be able to aid the entire race of Earth elementals. Right now, the only thing that prevented him to realize this species' dream, was his low cultivation rank. When the group of cultivators had noticed the Earth elementals and had guessed that a treasure essence nearby, not even in their wildest dreams did they imagine that it would be a perfect treasure. Because if they did, a bloody war would have already started. With a hint of embarrassment in his voice, Daniel approached Buriath and said, "I'm sorry. It seems like I am unable to create the Earth sphere right now. I might need some time." With what looked like a comforting smile, Buriath said, "I already expected you to need years to comprehend Earth essence. Waiting for you to cultivate is of no difference. Thanks for your understanding. It won't take long. We only need a large amount of money to purchase the resources," said Daniel with reassuring a tone. He then bid farewell and left the pocket dimension, reappearing right next to Heimart. The group nodded at Daniel in greeting, then they kept traveling towards Dresden. While in the middle of running, Daniel checked once again his group window, which after a single thought, had appeared in his mind. Underscore 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 group of the Karmic System's wielder. Name. Group of the Karmic System's wielder, provisory, number of members, details. 5 overall karma. 500,000 underscore 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 shared karmic effects, details, reputation, details. Underscore 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 Daniel almost lost his footing and dropped on the ground by surprise. The rest of the group turned to look at him in confusion. Trying his best to hide his surprise, Daniel said, "It's nothing. I didn't see that rock on the ground. Maybe you should fly. For your own safety." "Ha ha ha," said Legart with a teasing tone. Daniel giggled in an embarrassed manner, then followed the rest as they started to run once again. "Sua, what the hell are all those karma points about? When did I obtain them? And how do I have 5 people in the group already?" asked Daniel within his mind with a shocked voice. "You don't need to invite people for them to join your group. If they trust you as a leader, follow you, and follow your orders, then they are considered part of the group," said Sua with a matter-of-fact tone. "What about the points?" asked Daniel with a calmer tone. "You, the quiet one, the tanned girl, and the 2 idiots got those points when you've defended the elementals. Apparently the system decided that action was worth 100,000 karma points for each of you. Don't ask me if I agree with it," said Sua with a slightly irritated tone, almost as if in disagreement with the unconscious part of the system. "What the hell is your problem?" asked Daniel with a dissatisfied tone. With no response from Sua, Daniel decided to give up on the matter for now, and talk to his group members. "Guys, I remember this valley. It's just 1.5 days from the rocky forest. How come we are still here?" As embarrassment filled Legart's face, and a faint smile appeared on Alice and Heimart's mouths, Heimart looked at him and responded, "We let Legart pick the course. And ended up lost for a full day." "Great. I was actually thinking who to ask to make an inventory of the weapons we have and an estimate of their value. I guess Lagarde volunteers. Right. Said Daniel with a teasy smile. Heimart and Alice couldn't hold it any longer, so they started to laugh loudly. At the back of the group, a quiet Jirai followed the rest at a close distance. On his face, what looked like a faint yet genuine smile had appeared.